Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, drift through 100 fascinating facts about marine life, bioluminescent creatures glowing in darkness, ancient coral gardens at crushing depths, and hidden ecosystems thriving where sunlight never reaches. This is soft and soothing marine biology told in a calm, bedtime voice designed to guide you gently toward rest. You've got nothing to do but relax. Let your mind slow down and your body grow heavy as you drift through the ocean's mysteries, with no sudden sounds, no fast pacing, and nothing to pull you from rest. Every fact unfolds quietly, letting your consciousness drift while learning about the vast and ancient deep. If this calm exploration helps you unwind, consider liking and subscribing. Now, let's begin our descent into the deep. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, where sunlight fades into complete darkness, creatures produce their own light in a phenomenon that seems drawn more from science fiction than from nature itself. This living light, called bioluminescence, illuminates the abyss in flashes and glows, a chemical reaction between molecules called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase, mixing with oxygen to create cold light that needs no heat, no flame, no sun. Imagine descending slowly through the water column, watching the blue-green world above fade to black, and then seeing the first pinpricks of light appear around you, not from stars, but from the bodies of fish, jellyfish, shrimp, and squid that have learned to write messages in bioluminescence across the dark. Scientists estimate that more than 75% of all animals living in the open ocean water column can produce their own light, turning the deep sea into a living light show that has flickered continuously for millions of years. Consider how strange it must be for a creature that has never seen the sun, born in darkness, living its entire life in a world where the only light comes from other living things. Some animals make this light themselves, their cells holding the chemistry needed to glow. Others take in bioluminescent bacteria from the surrounding water and give these microorganisms a home inside special light organs, a partnership where the bacteria receive shelter and food while the host receives the gift of light. The Hawaiian bobtail squid, for instance, is colonized by glowing bacteria within hours of being born, and from that moment forward carries its own lantern beneath its body. This extraordinary ability to create light has evolved independently at least 40 separate times across the tree of life, appearing again and again in different lineages, as if nature keeps rediscovering the same brilliant solution to the problem of darkness. In ray-finned fishes alone, bioluminescence evolved 27 separate times, each species finding its own path to illumination. But the deep sea holds mysteries far older and stranger than glowing fish. Long ago, certain species of corals lived not in the shallow tropical reefs we picture when we think of coral, but in the cold, dark waters of the deep ocean. Over 65 million years, some of these deep water corals migrated upward toward the light, colonizing shallow tropical waters in at least 4 distinct moments of evolutionary history. They moved from a world of darkness to a world of sun, adapting to entirely new conditions, learning to work with photosynthetic algae instead of filtering food from the black water. This reverses the usual story we tell about ocean life, where creatures are thought to move from shallow waters down into the depths as they adapt to new niches. These corals chose the opposite journey, climbing slowly toward the surface across millions of years, generation by generation, leaving their dark origins behind. We know so little about what lives beneath the waves. Scientists estimate that we have identified only about 1/3 of all marine biodiversity, despite the fact that oceans cover more than 70% of our planet's surface and contain about 80% of all life on Earth. The numbers are humbling when you consider them quietly. We know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the floor of our own ocean. Only about 19% of the ocean has been mapped in any detail. The rest remains as mysterious to us as distant galaxies, its creatures swimming unseen, its mountains and valleys unexplored, its chemistry and currents moving in patterns we are only beginning to understand. Somewhere down there, in trenches and on abyssal plains, millions of species live out their lives without ever being observed by human eyes. Entire ecosystems functioning in perfect darkness, sustained by falling snow of organic matter from above and by the strange chemistry of the Earth itself. At 6,000 meters below the surface, where pressure would crush most human-made vessels, formations of rock rise from the seafloor covered in life. Corals anchor themselves to these underwater mountains, their polyps extended to catch drifting particles. Esponjas filter endless streams of seawater through their porous bodies. Arthropods scuttle across three-dimensional structures built by these sessile organisms, hunting for food in the crevices. Crustaceos wave their antennae in the current, sensing chemical signals in the water. Molluscos creep slowly over stone, and fish, those rare, mobile predators of the deep, glide through this landscape, their bodies adapted to cold and darkness and pressure that would seem unimaginable to creatures of the surface. These ecosystems at extreme depth are complex and interconnected, each organism playing its role in a web of life that exists beyond the reach of sunlight, beyond the realm of photosynthesis, in a world powered instead by the patient fall of organic particles and the slow, quiet chemistry of stone and water. Even in this remote darkness, life exerts pressure on life. Deep water corals, growing slowly in the cold, have evolved protective structures over their feeding polyps, calcified shields that guard against predators. This tells us that even here, where food is scarce and animals are few and far between, there are creatures that hunt and creatures that must defend themselves. Lesmus marinas and caracois crawl across coral branches, scraping at tissue, and the corals respond over evolutionary time by building armor from calcium carbonate, the same substance that forms their skeletons. It is a kind of arms race carried out in slow motion, predator and prey locked in an ancient dance where each adaptation is answered by a counter-adaptation, where survival means being just slightly better protected or slightly more persistent than your opponent. This is the currency of deep ocean life, paid out in millimeters of shell and fractions of energy saved, compounding across generations into the diversity we see today. Food is the great limiting factor in the deep. Only a small fraction of the organic matter produced in the sunlit surface waters ever reaches the ocean floor. Most of it is consumed or decomposed as it sinks, recycled back into the water column long before it can settle on the bottom. What does reach the deep arrives as marine snow, tiny particles of dead plankton, fecal pellets, mucus, and detritus drifting downward through thousands of meters of water like an inverted blizzard, so sparse that a deep-sea creature might wait days for a substantial meal to pass within reach. Because of this scarcity, biomass in the deep ocean is many times smaller than in coastal zones where upwelling currents bring nutrients to the surface and sunlight powers vast blooms of phytoplankton. Yet life persists, patient and efficient, extracting energy from the smallest sources, resting between meals, growing slowly, reproducing infrequently, living long lives in the cold dark where time moves differently than it does above. And still, the deep sea probably holds millions of species we have never seen. Every expedition with remotely operated vehicles brings back footage of creatures that cannot be immediately identified, organisms so strange and specialized that they challenge our understanding of what is possible. Some of these animals are evolutionary experiments that succeeded in isolation, the lineages that split off millions of years ago and adapted to such specific conditions that they now live nowhere else on Earth. The deep ocean is not one habitat, but thousands of micro-habitats, each with its own temperature, pressure, chemistry, and current patterns, each capable of supporting unique communities of life. Hydrothermal vents spew superheated water rich in minerals, creating oases of abundance in the desert of the abyss. Cold seeps leak methane and hydrogen sulfide, fueling bacteria that form the base of chemosynthetic food webs. Whale falls, the carcasses of great whales that sink to the bottom, become islands of plenty, sustaining specialized scavengers for decades as the bones slowly dissolve. In all these environments, species have evolved that exist nowhere else, adding to the catalog of biodiversity that we are only beginning to compile. Current estimates suggest that approximately 27,000 species of deep-sea animals have been identified and cataloged by science. This number grows each year as researchers continue their work, naming and describing organisms collected from depths that were unreachable just decades ago. But 27,000 is almost certainly a tiny fraction of what exists. For every species we know, there may be dozens or hundreds we do not. For every square kilometer of seafloor that has been surveyed, there are thousands that remain untouched, unobserved, unknown. The deep ocean is vast beyond comprehension, covering more area than all continents combined, and it is largely empty to our eyes, a frontier that will take centuries to explore fully, if we ever do. In the meantime, life down there continues as it has for hundreds of millions of years, glowing and hunting and filtering and reproducing in patterns and rhythms we are only beginning to sense, a reminder that the Earth still holds mysteries, and that the ocean, quiet and dark and patient, keeps most of its secrets close. There are places on the ocean floor where the Earth itself feeds life, where cracks in the crust allow seawater to seep down into the planet's interior, heating to temperatures that would vaporize most organic molecules, then rising again in superheated plumes that gush from the seafloor in what we call hydrothermal vents. The water emerging from these vents can reach 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, and it carries with it a rich cocktail of minerals dissolved from the rocks below, sulfides and metals that precipitate out as the scalding water meets the near-freezing ocean, forming chimneys of stone that grow taller year by year. Around these vents, in the absolute darkness of the abyss, life thrives in abundance that seems impossible given the hostile conditions. Microorganisms here do not rely on sunlight for energy, but instead use a process called chemosynthesis, oxidizing the hydrogen sulfide and methane in the vent water to produce organic compounds, forming the base of a food web entirely independent of photosynthesis. Tube worms, some growing to lengths of 2 meters, anchor themselves near the vents and host chemosynthetic bacteria in their tissues, a partnership so complete that the worms have no mouth and no digestive system, relying entirely on their bacterial companions to provide nutrition. Cold seeps are cousins to hydrothermal vents, occurring in similar tectonically active regions, but releasing hydrocarbon-rich fluids instead of superheated water. Here, too, specialized microorganisms convert methane and sulfate into energy. And here, too, complex communities develop around these chemical oases. The bacteria form thick mats on the seafloor, white and yellow films of living cells that cover the rock and sediment. Mussels and clams colonize these areas, hosting symbiotic bacteria in their gills and using the energy the bacteria produce to grow large and dense populations in places where most animals would starve. It reminds us that life is not limited to one energy source, that evolution has found multiple paths to survival, and that even in the most extreme environments on Earth, in cold and darkness and crushing pressure, the chemistry of life finds a way to continue, patient and persistent and endlessly creative. Yet despite this abundance of life in isolated pockets, the broader story of marine biodiversity over the past half-century has been one of decline. Between 1970 and 2010, a span of just 40 years, marine biodiversity globally was reduced by 50%. This is not an estimate or a projection, but a measured fact, documented through decades of scientific monitoring across the world's oceans. Populations of certain fish species fell by as much as 75% during this same period, a collapse so rapid and so comprehensive that it represents one of the great ecological catastrophes of the modern era. The causes are many and interconnected, overfishing being the most obvious, but also habitat destruction, pollution, and the slow, steady warming and acidification of seawater as the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The ocean has absorbed about half of all anthropogenic carbon emissions over the past 2 centuries, acting as a buffer that has slowed climate change on land, but at enormous cost to marine ecosystems. Coral reefs are among the most vulnerable. These structures, both tropical and cold water varieties, are extremely sensitive to changes in ocean chemistry, particularly to acidification, which makes it harder for corals to build their calcium carbonate skeletons. Currently, about 60% of the world's reefs are threatened by a combination of warming water, acidification, and other human impacts. By 2030, that number is projected to rise to 90%. By 2050, essentially 100% of coral reefs may be considered functionally extinct if current trends continue. This is not a distant or abstract problem, but something unfolding now in our lifetimes, as reefs that have existed for thousands of years bleach and die, their symbiotic algae expelled by stress, their structures crumbling as fish, and invertebrates that depend on them disappear. More than 850 million people benefit directly from the economic, social, and cultural services that coral reefs provide, relying on them for food, for income from tourism, for storm protection, as reefs break ocean swells before they reach the coast. When the reefs die, these benefits vanish, and the communities that depend on them face impossible choices. The numbers are stark when you consider them. Coral reef populations showed a 34% decline between 1970 and 2010, a rate of loss that would be unthinkable in any terrestrial ecosystem, but which has occurred largely unnoticed beneath the waves. These reefs support about 25% of all marine species, despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, making them among the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet, rivaling tropical rainforests in the density and complexity of life they sustain. When a reef collapses, it takes with it hundreds or thousands of species, some of which may exist nowhere else. The loss that cascades through the ecosystem, affecting not only the creatures that live on the reef, but also those that visit it, the fish that come to feed or breed, the turtles and rays and sharks that patrol its edges, the seabirds that dive for fish, attracted to the reef's abundance. But life also builds upward from the deep, in structures that can rival any reef in complexity, on underwater mountains called seamounts, and on the continental slopes that descend from shallow waters into the abyss. Corals and sponges create three-dimensional frameworks that other organisms colonize. These cold water corals grow without sunlight, in waters too cold and too deep for the tropical species we are more familiar with. They grow slowly, adding millimeters per year to their branches, and they can live for centuries or even millennia, becoming ancient living monuments to the persistence of life in the dark. Around them gather communities of arthropods, crustaceans, mollusks, and fish, each finding a niche in the structure the corals provide. These deep reefs are every bit as important as their shallow counterparts, and they are just as vulnerable to damage from trawling nets and other destructive fishing practices that scrape the seafloor and destroy structures that took thousands of years to grow. Scientists have documented these communities using remotely operated vehicles equipped with cameras, descending to depths no human could survive, and filming for hours as the vehicles glide slowly over the bottom. In one expedition, researchers recorded 36 continuous hours of footage over a 26-kilometer transect, capturing images of life at depths where pressure is measured in hundreds of atmospheres and where the water is just a few degrees above freezing. The footage reveals a world that is both alien and familiar, with animals that have recognizable forms, fish and crabs and worms, but also creatures that defy easy description, gelatinous drifters and things that look more like plants than animals, though they are neither. Every dive brings new observations, species that have not been formally described, behaviors that have never been recorded, interactions between organisms that challenge our understanding of how ecosystems are structured. The deep sea is not one habitat, but many, a complex mosaic of environments, each with its own physical and chemical characteristics. Abyssal plains, the flat expanses of mud that cover more than half the ocean floor, support communities dominated by small worms, crustaceans, and echinoderms that burrow through sediment or creep slowly across its surface. Trenches, the deepest parts of the ocean, have their own specialized fauna adapted to pressures that exceed 1,000 atmospheres. Mid-ocean ridges, the underwater mountain ranges where tectonic plates pull apart, host volcanic activity and hydrothermal vents that create pockets of warmth and chemical energy in an otherwise cold and energy-poor environment. Each of these habitats requires different adaptations, different strategies for finding food and avoiding predators and reproducing successfully, and the result is a biodiversity that compares to tropical rainforests despite the apparent monotony of the dark water. Some organisms in the deep sea feed by filtering particles from the water, extending feathery appendages, or pumping water through their bodies and extracting whatever organic matter happens to be present. Others are deposit feeders, crawling across the sediment and ingesting it, digesting the bacteria and organic detritus mixed with the mud and excreting the rest. Some are scavengers, patrolling the bottom for carcasses that fall from above, able to detect the chemical signature of decay from great distances and to gather quickly when a large food source appears. And a few are active predators, fish mostly, that hunt in the dark using senses adapted to detect motion and electrical fields and bioluminescent flashes. This diversity of feeding strategies allows many species to coexist in the same area, each exploiting a different resource, each filling a different ecological role, and together creating a functioning ecosystem even in conditions that seem too harsh to support life at all. Even large predators, species we typically associate with the sunlit ocean, venture into the deep. Blue sharks and swordfish, both active swimmers that need large territories and abundant prey, are found in deep waters as well as shallow ones, moving between zones as they hunt. Their presence in the deep sea tells us that these ecosystems are not isolated but connected to the waters above, that nutrients and energy flow between depths, and that the boundaries we draw between ocean zones are more about human convenience than about the reality of how marine life organizes itself. The ocean is continuous, its layers mixing through currents and upwelling and the vertical migrations of animals. And this connectivity means that changes in one part of the system eventually ripple through the whole. The deep ocean depends almost entirely on what falls from above, a dependency so complete that if the surface waters suddenly ceased producing organic matter, most deep-sea ecosystems would collapse within months or years. Every meal in the abyss begins with photosynthesis happening thousands of meters overhead, where sunlight penetrates the water and microscopic algae convert carbon dioxide and nutrients into living tissue. Some of this tissue is eaten by zooplankton, which are in turn eaten by small fish, which are eaten by larger fish. And at each step, some fraction of the energy is lost, released as heat, or excreted as waste. What remains, the uneaten scraps and the bodies of the dead, sink slowly downward through the water column, degrading as it falls, consumed by bacteria, and broken into smaller and smaller pieces until only the most resistant materials reach the bottom. This connection between surface and depth means that the deep sea is not independent, but is instead a reflection of what happens above, its abundance tied to the productivity of the sunlit zone, its rhythms following seasonal patterns of plankton blooms that occur far beyond the reach of any light. In certain regions, oceanographic conditions create pulses of productivity that sustain rich communities even at great depth. Upwelling zones, where deep water rises to the surface carrying nutrients from below, trigger massive blooms of phytoplankton that feed vast schools of fish and swarms of krill. And when these organisms die or produce waste, the resulting rain of organic matter supports dense populations on the seafloor beneath. The same currents that bring nutrients to the surface also create intense water movement near the bottom. And this hydrodynamic energy prevents fine sediments from settling, leaving rocky substrates where filter-feeding organisms can attach and thrive. Corals, sponges, sea fans, and barnacles colonize these hard surfaces, extending polyps and filtering appendages into the current and extracting particles of food as the water rushes past. Some animals depend on these current-swept environments so completely that they cannot survive in calmer waters, their entire biology shaped by the constant flow. Their reproduction timed to disperse larvae when currents are strongest so that offspring will be carried to new habitats rather than settling nearby and competing with their parents. There are no plants in the deep sea, no kelp forests or seagrass beds, no photosynthetic organisms anchored to the bottom and growing toward a sun they will never see. Plants require light to survive, and below about 1,000 meters, depending on water clarity, there is no light at all, not even the faintest blue glow. This absence of primary producers makes the deep fundamentally different from almost every other habitat on Earth. Forests and grasslands, coral reefs and tide pools, Lakes and rivers all have plants or algae at the base of their food webs, organisms that capture energy from the sun and make it available to herbivores, which are then eaten by carnivores. But the deep sea has no such foundation. Its food web is built on detritus, on the remains of life that occurred elsewhere, and on the specialized bacteria that can extract energy from chemicals rather than light. It is an ecosystem of darkness, sustained by distant sunlight, filtered through thousands of meters of water and countless trophic transfers, a place where energy is so scarce that every calorie must be conserved, every meal stretched as far as possible. Yet even in this darkness, light appears, not from the sun, but from the animals themselves. Bioluminescence is so common in the deep ocean that it becomes the dominant source of illumination, the only light most organisms will ever experience. Fish flash patterns on their sides to communicate with potential mates or to startle predators. Jellyfish pulse with waves of blue-green light as they drift through the water. Squid squirt clouds of glowing bacteria instead of ink, creating decoys that confuse attackers. Shrimp vomit luminous fluid when threatened, lighting up the water around them and forcing predators to choose between staying hidden in darkness or revealing themselves by swimming through the glow. This living light breaks the monotony of the abyss, turning the ocean into a space of fleeting illuminations, points and streaks and clouds of cold fire that appear and vanish in seconds, visible only to eyes adapted to see in near total darkness, a language of light spoken by creatures that have never known day or night, only the gradations of black and the sudden brilliance of bioluminescence. Scientists studying the deep sea have spent decades trying to catalog the life that exists there, a task made difficult by the vastness of the environment and the technical challenges of working at depth. One notable research effort focused on the Rio Grande Rise, an underwater plateau in the South Atlantic, where the seafloor rises to within a few thousand meters of the surface. Over 10 years, expeditions to this region revealed extraordinary diversity, with coral gardens and sponge fields creating three-dimensional habitats that support hundreds of species. The structures built by these sessile organisms provide attachment points for other filter feeders, hiding places for small crustaceans, and hunting grounds for fish that patrol the edges looking for prey. Some of these organisms are found only on the Rio Grande Rise and nowhere else in the world, endemic species that evolved in isolation on this underwater mountain, separated from similar habitats by expanses of deep water that they cannot cross. In other deep-sea environments, life clusters around cold seeps, places where hydrocarbon-rich fluids leak from the seafloor, usually in areas where tectonic activity has fractured the crust. These seeps release methane and hydrogen sulfide, gases that are toxic to most animals, but which specialized bacteria can metabolize, using the chemical energy to produce organic compounds in a process analogous to photosynthesis, but requiring no light. The bacteria grow in dense mats, white or yellow films that cover the rock and sediment around the seep, and these mats become food for grazers, small snails, and worms that scrape the bacterial film from the surface. Larger animals, particularly mussels and clams, host the bacteria inside their own tissues, forming symbiotic partnerships where the mollusk provides shelter and the bacteria provide nutrition. Over time, these seeps can support substantial biomass, far more than the surrounding deep-sea floor, creating oases of life in an otherwise sparse landscape. The organisms living at extreme depths have evolved remarkable adaptations to tolerate conditions that would kill most surface-dwelling species. Pressure at 6,000 meters is more than 600 times atmospheric pressure at sea level, enough to compress gas-filled spaces and alter the behavior of proteins and cell membranes. Deep-sea fish often lack swim bladders, the gas-filled organs that shallow water fish use to control buoyancy, because gas cannot be maintained at such pressures. Instead, they rely on lipids, fats that are less dense than water and provide some lift without the complications of compressed gas. Their proteins are structured differently, with amino acid sequences that remain functional under pressure that would denature the proteins of surface organisms. Their cell membranes are rich in unsaturated fats that stay fluid even in the near-freezing temperatures of the deep, allowing cells to function normally despite the cold. These adaptations have evolved independently in many lineages, a testament to the power of natural selection to shape life to fit even the most extreme environments. Despite the low biomass, species diversity in the deep remains surprisingly high, a pattern that has puzzled ecologists for decades. In some regions of the deep sea, a single trawl haul might contain dozens of species, many of them rare, represented by only one or two individuals in the sample. This high diversity may be maintained by the patchy distribution of food and the slow pace of life, which prevents any one species from dominating. Resources arrive unpredictably. A whale carcass here, a pulse of marine snow there, and different species are adapted to exploit different types of resources, reducing direct competition. Reproduction is infrequent, and larval dispersal is slow, so populations remain small, and local extinctions are balanced by recolonization from nearby areas, maintaining diversity over long time scales. The result is an ecosystem that is both stable and dynamic, changing slowly over centuries, but maintaining a consistent structure and set of interactions that have persisted for millions of years. The deep sea encompasses an extraordinary range of habitats, each with its own community of organisms adapted to local conditions. There are infinitely many variations in temperature, pressure, oxygen concentration, sediment type, current speed, and food availability, and each combination of factors creates a microenvironment that can support a unique assemblage of species. Abyssal plains of soft mud are home to burrowing worms and deposit feeders. Rocky outcrops attract sessile filter feeders. Hydrothermal vents support chemosynthetic communities. Seamounts rising from the deep create currents that concentrate plankton and attract large predators. Submarine canyons channel sediment and organic matter from the continental shelf down into the abyss, creating highways of nutrients that support elevated biomass. Each of these habitats contributes to the overall diversity of the deep sea, and together they make up the largest and least explored ecosystem on the planet. Exploration of these zones continues, with scientists deploying increasingly sophisticated instruments to observe and sample life at depths that remain largely unknown. Remotely operated vehicles carry cameras and sampling tools to the seafloor, transmitting live video to ships on the surface and collecting specimens that are brought back to laboratories for detailed study. Autonomous vehicles roam the ocean for months at a time, following pre-programmed routes and recording data on temperature, salinity, oxygen, and the abundance of life. Deep-sea trawls drag nets across the bottom, collecting everything in their path and providing snapshots of community composition, though at the cost of destroying the very habitats being studied. Each method has strengths and weaknesses, and together they are slowly revealing the nature of life in the deep, building a picture of ecosystems that are vast and ancient and still mostly hidden from view. Ecosystems that represent the baseline condition of the ocean, the way most of the marine environment has existed for hundreds of millions of years, dark and cold and patient, teeming with life that asks for nothing but time and the slow rain of nutrients from above. Some creatures of the deep ocean communicate not through sound or touch, but through light, producing flashes and glows that serve as signals between individuals of the same species. A fish seeking a mate might display a specific pattern of bioluminescent spots along its flanks, a code that others of its kind recognize and respond to, while predators see only meaningless flickers in the dark. This communication by light is silent and requires no energy beyond the chemical reaction that produces the glow, making it efficient in an environment where every calorie must be carefully managed. The signals can be simple, a single flash to say, "Here I am," or complex, a sequence of pulses that convey information about readiness to reproduce or territorial boundaries or warnings about danger nearby. Over millions of years, different species have evolved different light patterns, each lineage developing its own vocabulary of luminescence, and the result is an ocean full of conversations happening in wavelengths of blue and green, the colors that travel farthest through seawater, conversations that have been ongoing since long before humans existed and will likely continue long after we are gone. In the deep sea, there are no plants to anchor food webs, no kelp or seagrass converting sunlight into tissue that herbivores can eat. Instead, the entire ecosystem relies on food chains that begin either with detritus falling from above or with bacteria capable of chemosynthesis, organisms that extract energy from chemicals rather than from light. This makes the deep fundamentally different from almost every other ecosystem on Earth, where photosynthesis forms the base of the energy pyramid and where herbivores are abundant and diverse. Here there are no herbivores because there's nothing to graze, no meadows of algae, no forests of seaweed. Instead, animals are either detritivores, eating the rain of organic particles from above, or predators, hunting other animals that have themselves fed on detritus or on chemosynthetic bacteria. It is a simpler food web in some ways, with fewer trophic levels, but it is also more fragile, more dependent on the steady input of energy from distant sources, more vulnerable to disruptions in the surface ocean where the detritus originates. Most organisms in the deep sea are bentonicos, meaning they live on or in the seafloor rather than swimming freely through the water column. These bottom-dwelling creatures include worms that burrow through sediment, crustaceans that scuttle across rock, mollusks that creep slowly over substrate, and sessile organisms like corals and sponges that attach permanently to hard surfaces and never move again after settling as larvae. The bentonicos community is diverse and specialized, with different species adapted to different types of seafloor, some preferring soft mud where they can burrow and hide, others requiring hard rock where they can attach and filter feed. This division of habitat reduces competition, allowing many species to coexist in the same general area by exploiting slightly different resources or microhabitats. And it creates a mosaic of life across the ocean floor, where every square meter might harbor a different assemblage of organisms depending on subtle variations in sediment type or current flow or the availability of food. Predation in the deep sea is practiced almost exclusively by fish, the only organisms with sufficient mobility to actively hunt other animals across any distance. Most bentonicos creatures are too slow or too firmly attached to pursue prey, and so they rely on other feeding strategies, filtering particles from the water or scraping bacteria from rock or scavenging carcasses that happen to fall nearby. but fish can swim, and this gives them access to a feeding mode that is close to most other deep-sea animals. They patrol the bottom, looking for movement, using highly sensitive lateral line organs that detect vibrations in the water, or relying on bioluminescent lures to attract prey close enough to strike. Some deep-sea fish have mouths that can open extraordinarily wide, allowing them to swallow prey larger than themselves, an adaptation that makes sense in an environment where meals are infrequent and must be taken advantage of whenever they appear. Others have teeth that angle backward, ensuring that anything caught cannot escape, a design that reflects the desperation of life in a place where the next meal might be days or weeks away. On the seafloor, where light never reaches and currents are often weak, thin films of bacteria cover every surface, metabolizing whatever organic matter is present and forming the base of many food chains. These bacterial films are invisible to the naked eye, but represent a critical resource for organisms that graze on them, scraping the rock or sediment with specialized mouthparts and digesting the bacteria along with whatever detritus has accumulated. The bacteria themselves are diverse, including species that break down complex organic molecules, species that metabolize methane or sulfides, and species that form symbiotic relationships with larger animals, living inside their tissues and providing nutrition in exchange for shelter and access to chemical-rich environments. This microbial community is ancient and resilient, able to persist in conditions that would kill most multicellular life, and it provides a foundation of productivity that supports the entire deep-sea ecosystem even in the absence of sunlight. Some animals in the deep sea are specialized scavengers, feeding exclusively on carcasses that sink from the surface, a strategy known as necrophagia. These scavengers include certain species of crustaceans and fish that can detect the chemical signature of decay from great distances, sometimes kilometers away, and that gather quickly when a large food source appears. A dead whale sinking to the seafloor becomes a feast that can sustain a community of scavengers for years or even decades as they consume the blubber, the muscle, and eventually the bones themselves, which harbor specialized bacteria that break down lipids stored in the bone matrix. These whale falls create islands of abundance in the deep sea, temporary oases where biomass and diversity spike far above background levels, and they support species found nowhere else. Organisms so specialized for feeding on whale remains that they cannot survive without them. When the whale is finally consumed and nothing remains but scattered fragments of bone, the community disperses, its members drifting or crawling away in search of the next carcass, which might be nearby or might be hundreds of kilometers distant. Other organisms are deposit feeders, ingesting sediment and extracting nutrition from the bacteria and organic detritus mixed with the mud. These deposit feeders include many species of worms and small crustaceans that process vast quantities of sediment, passing it through their digestive systems and excreting it as fecal pellets that are slightly depleted in organic matter but otherwise unchanged. Over time, this feeding activity bioturbates the sediment, mixing layers and redistributing nutrients, and it plays an important role in the cycling of carbon and other elements through the deep-sea environment. The deposit feeders themselves are prey for larger animals, creating a link between the sediment and the water column, between the microbial world and the world of fish and crustaceans, and ensuring that energy flows through the system even though primary productivity is absent. Filter feeders, known as suspensiveros, extend appendages or pump water through their bodies, extracting particles of organic matter and zooplankton from the water column. These organisms include many species of sponges, which can filter enormous volumes of water each day, removing bacteria and tiny particles and incorporating them into their tissues. Other filter feeders include certain bivalves and tube-dwelling worms that extend feathery structures into the current and trap passing particles, and barnacles and other crustaceans that wave their legs rhythmically to create currents that draw food toward their mouths. Filter feeding is most effective in areas with strong currents that bring a steady supply of suspended particles, and as a result, filter feeders tend to concentrate in certain locations, on seamounts and ridges where currents are enhanced, creating dense aggregations that can be seen in remotely operated vehicle footage as fields of waving appendages and pulsing siphons, all working continuously to extract the meager nutrition available in the water around them. Coral reefs, both tropical and cold water, support approximately 25% of all marine species, despite occupying less than 1% of the ocean floor. This makes them among the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet, comparable to tropical rainforests in the density and variety of life they sustain. The structural complexity of reefs creates countless niches, crevices where small fish can hide, overhangs where invertebrates can attach, caves where nocturnal species shelter during the day. This physical structure is built slowly over centuries or millennia by corals depositing calcium carbonate, and it provides the foundation for a community that includes not only the corals themselves, but also sponges, algae, fish, crustaceans, mollusks, worms, and countless other organisms, each playing a role in the ecosystem, each dependent on the reef for survival. When reefs are damaged or destroyed, this diversity collapses, and the species that depend on the reef must either find new habitat or face local extinction, a process that is happening now across the world as warming waters and acidification stress corals beyond their ability to recover. Manguezais, the mangrove forests that grow in shallow coastal waters in tropical and subtropical regions, also play a critical role in maintaining populations of many fish species. These forests provide nursery habitat where juvenile fish can grow in relative safety from predators, sheltered among the tangled roots that rise from the mud. They also stabilize sediments, preventing erosion and maintaining water clarity, and they filter pollutants from runoff before it reaches the open ocean. But mangrove forests have been in decline for decades, cleared for coastal development and aquaculture, and the loss of these habitats has contributed to declines in fish populations across many regions, demonstrating how interconnected marine ecosystems are, how damage in one area can ripple outward and affect species and communities far removed from the initial disturbance. Algas marinas, the seaweeds and kelps that form underwater forests in coastal zones, have also experienced significant declines in many regions, a loss that reverberates through ecosystems because these plants provide habitat and food for countless species. Long strands of kelp create three-dimensional structure in the water column, much like trees in a terrestrial forest, and fish shelter among the fronds while invertebrates attach to the stipes and blades, grazing on the algae itself or on the small organisms that colonize its surface. When kelp forests decline, whether from warming water or pollution or overgrazing by sea urchins whose predators have been removed, the entire community collapses, and what was once a productive and diverse ecosystem becomes a barren seafloor covered in nothing but rock and sand. This pattern has played out in many temperate coastal waters over recent decades, another quiet loss of biodiversity that happens beneath the surface where most people never see it. Another reminder that the ocean is changing in ways that will reshape life on this planet for centuries to come. In the waters off the coast of Brazil, scientists have found that cold water corals are actually more common in deep waters than shallow water tropical corals are in sunlit zones. This discovery challenges the assumption that corals are primarily tropical organisms, showing instead that they thrive in a wide range of environments, including the cold darkness of the continental slope. These deep Brazilian corals form reefs and gardens that rival their shallow counterparts in complexity and biodiversity, supporting communities of fish and invertebrates adapted to life at depth. Some of these deep reefs lie near oil and gas deposits, and there is concern that extraction activities could damage habitats that have taken thousands of years to develop, habitats that we are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. It reminds us that even in well-studied ocean regions, there is much we do not know, and that protection must often be implemented based on incomplete information, because waiting for complete understanding might mean waiting until it is too late to prevent irreversible damage. Hydrocarbons, the chemical compounds that make up petroleum, play a surprising role in maintaining life in certain deep-sea environments, particularly around natural oil seeps where petroleum leaks slowly from the seafloor. Specialized bacteria can metabolize these hydrocarbons, breaking them down and using the energy released to produce organic compounds, and these bacteria form the base of food chains that support worms, crustaceans, and fish. This is another example of chemosynthesis, life powered not by sunlight but by chemical reactions, and it demonstrates the remarkable versatility of biology, the way life finds energy wherever it can, whether from light or sulfides or methane or hydrocarbons, adapting to whatever resources are available and building ecosystems around them. Over millions of years, natural oil seeps have supported these communities, and the organisms living there have become so specialized that they likely cannot survive without the steady supply of hydrocarbons that their metabolism requires. The great masses of water that make up the ocean currents of the world are responsible not only for distributing heat around the planet, but also for distributing living organisms, carrying larvae and spores and drifting adults from one region to another, connecting populations that would otherwise be isolated. In Brazilian waters, several major currents converge, bringing warm tropical water from the north and cold Antarctic water from the south. And this mixing creates gradients of temperature and nutrients that support high biodiversity. Species from different biogeographic zones meet and overlap in these regions, creating communities that include organisms with tropical, temperate, and even polar affinities, all coexisting in the same area because the water masses they arrived in are mixing and blending. It is a dynamic and ever-changing situation where the boundaries between communities shift with the currents, and where larvae settling in one year might find conditions very different from those their parents experienced, a variability that keeps ecosystems resilient but also unpredictable. During scientific expeditions to study deep-sea biodiversity, researchers typically collect samples of the most representative individuals they encounter, choosing specimens that appear typical of their species rather than seeking out rare or unusual forms. These collections are brought back to laboratories on shore where they can be examined in detail, measured and photographed and preserved for future study, and where tissue samples can be taken for genetic analysis to determine relationships between populations and to identify species that may be new to science. The specimens become part of museum collections, physical archives of biodiversity that document what lives in the ocean at this moment in time, records that future researchers will be able to consult to understand how communities have changed over decades or centuries. This work of collection and preservation is slow and painstaking, requiring careful handling of delicate organisms that often do not survive the transition from high pressure to surface conditions. But it is essential for building the catalog of marine life that will inform conservation decisions and help us understand the ocean's role in the global ecosystem. The physical and chemical characteristics of the deep sea are unlike those of any other environment on Earth, with pressures that can exceed 1,000 atmospheres in the deepest trenches, temperatures that hover just above freezing, and complete absence of light beyond the first 1,000 meters. These extreme conditions have shaped the evolution of deep-sea organisms in fundamental ways, selecting for traits that allow survival under stress that would kill most surface-dwelling species. Proteins must remain functional, despite pressure that would denature normal enzymes. Cell membranes must stay fluid in near-freezing water. Metabolisms must operate efficiently on minimal food. Reproductive strategies must ensure that offspring can find mates in a vast and sparsely populated environment. Every aspect of deep-sea life is tuned to these conditions, the result of millions of years of adaptation, and the organisms living there are as specialized for their environment as desert plants are for arid conditions or polar bears are for Arctic ice. Scientists around the world have established molecular biology laboratories dedicated to studying the evolution and adaptation of deep-sea animals, sequencing their genomes to understand how they have diverged from shallow water relatives and what genetic changes have enabled them to colonize the abyss. This research has revealed that many deep-sea lineages are ancient, splitting from their shallow water ancestors tens or even hundreds of millions of years ago, and that they have accumulated unique genetic adaptations found nowhere else in the tree of life. Some of these adaptations involve changes to the structure of key proteins, substitutions of amino acids that make enzymes more pressure tolerant or more efficient at low temperatures. Others involve changes in gene regulation, turning certain genes on or off in response to environmental cues, allowing organisms to adjust their metabolism or their behavior to match the conditions they experience. By studying these adaptations, scientists hope to understand not only how life has evolved in the deep sea, but also the limits of what is biologically possible, the boundaries beyond which life cannot exist, no matter how well adapted. One group of organisms that has received particular attention from researchers is the antomedusas, a diverse assemblage that includes corals, jellyfish, sea anemones, and hydroids, all of which share a basic body plan but have radiated into an extraordinary range of forms and lifestyles. Some antomedusas are solitary, living as individual polyps or medusae, while others are colonial, forming structures composed of thousands or millions of genetically identical individuals working together as a single organism. Some build skeletons of calcium carbonate, while others have no hard parts at all and drift through the water as translucent bells of tissue. Some capture prey with stinging cells, while others filter particles from the current, or even host photosynthetic symbionts that provide them with nutrition. This diversity within a single group illustrates the power of evolution to generate variation, to take a basic template and modify it in countless ways, producing organisms adapted to nearly every marine environment from tide pools to the abyss. Funding for deep-sea research comes from a variety of sources, including national science agencies and international collaborations that bring together researchers from multiple countries to tackle questions too large or too expensive for any single institution to address. Expeditions to the deep sea are logistically complex and financially demanding, requiring specialized ships equipped with remotely operated vehicles, laboratories for processing samples, and technicians trained to maintain and operate sensitive instruments. Ship time alone can cost tens of thousands of dollars per day, and a single expedition might last weeks or months, pushing budgets into the millions. Despite these costs, such expeditions are essential for advancing our understanding of the deep ocean, for collecting the data needed to map biodiversity and identify vulnerable habitats, and for training the next generation of marine scientists who will carry this work forward into the future. The technology used to explore the deep sea has advanced dramatically over the past few decades, with remotely operated vehicles now capable of diving to depths that were unreachable just a generation ago and staying submerged for days or even weeks at a time. These vehicles are equipped with high-definition cameras that can capture footage in near total darkness, using only the artificial lights mounted on the vehicle's frame, and they carry robotic arms that can collect samples or manipulate objects on the seafloor with surprising precision. Some vehicles are tethered to the surface ship by cables that provide power and transmit data in real time, allowing scientists on board to watch live video and direct the vehicle's movements, while others are autonomous, following pre-programmed routes and recording data that is downloaded after the vehicle returns to the surface. Both approaches have their advantages, and together they are revealing the deep ocean in unprecedented detail, showing us a world that is vast and diverse and strange, a world that challenges our assumptions about where life can exist and how ecosystems can function, a world that has been there all along, hidden beneath the waves, waiting quietly to be discovered. Light from the sun moves through the ocean water in a gradual diminishment that begins at the very surface and continues downward through hundreds of meters until finally there is nothing left, no trace of brightness, only absolute and permanent darkness. This extinction of light happens because water absorbs and scatters photons as they pass through it, and the deeper the light penetrates, the fewer photons remain, until eventually even the longest wavelengths, the blues and greens that travel farthest through seawater, are completely absorbed and the ocean becomes as black as the space between stars. The transition is not sudden, but gradual, a slow fading from the bright turquoise of shallow water to the deep blue of mid-depths to the absolute black of the abyss, a continuum that organisms exploit by positioning themselves at depths where the light level matches their needs, where there is enough illumination to see prey or to photosynthesize, but not so much that they become visible to predators hunting from below against the bright background above. As depth increases, so does pressure, the weight of all the water above bearing down on everything below, increasing by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of descent. At 6,000 meters, the pressure is 600 times what it is at the surface, enough to compress air-filled spaces to a tiny fraction of their original volume, enough to alter the physical properties of water itself, and to challenge the structural integrity of any organism trying to maintain its shape against the crushing force. Yet life persists, adapted over millions of years to tolerate these pressures, with bodies that lack gas-filled cavities, with proteins that remain functional under compression, with membranes and enzymes tuned to work efficiently in conditions that would destroy the biochemistry of surface-dwelling creatures. This adaptation to pressure is one of the defining features of deep-sea life, a constraint that shapes everything from cellular metabolism to reproductive strategies to the distribution of species across depth gradients. Temperature in the deep ocean is remarkably uniform, hovering just a few degrees above the freezing point of seawater, regardless of season or latitude. This cold is constant and unchanging, a feature of the deep that contrasts sharply with the surface, where temperatures can vary by tens of degrees depending on location and time of year. For organisms living in the deep, this thermal stability means that they never experience the seasonal cycles that structure life in shallow waters. No summer blooms of plankton, no winter die-offs, only a slow and steady progression of days that are indistinguishable from one another, marked not by changes in temperature or light, but by the unpredictable arrival of food from above. The cold also slows metabolic rates, allowing organisms to survive on minimal food intake, to grow slowly and live long lives, to reproduce infrequently, but with high investment in each offspring. Strategies that make sense in an environment where energy is scarce and where rushing through life would only lead to starvation. Oxygen in the deep sea is present but often limited, with concentrations lower than in surface waters, where gas exchange with the atmosphere keeps oxygen levels near saturation. In some regions, particularly in areas with high productivity at the surface and restricted water circulation at depth, oxygen levels drop so low that only specially adapted organisms can survive, creating oxygen minimum zones where fish and mobile invertebrates are rare, and where the seafloor is dominated by bacteria and a few tolerant species of worms. These low oxygen environments are expanding as the ocean warms, because warm water holds less dissolved gas than cold water, and this deoxygenation is another stressor on marine life, another way that human activities are altering the conditions that have prevailed for millions of years and forcing organisms to adapt or relocate or face extinction. Evolution in the deep sea has proceeded slowly over geological timescales, with lineages diverging and adapting to specific niches in a process that has taken millions of years and that continues today, though at a pace imperceptible to human observers. Many deep-sea species are ancient, their ancestors having colonized the abyss tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, and in the stable environment of the deep, they have changed relatively little over time, becoming what are sometimes called living fossils, organisms whose body plans and behaviors resemble those of species known only from the fossil record. This evolutionary conservatism makes sense in a stable environment where there is little selective pressure for rapid change, where adaptations that worked in the distant past continue to work today, and where the costs of innovation might outweigh the benefits. Yet even in the deep, evolution continues, driven by competition for scarce resources, by the need to avoid predators, by the pressures of reproduction and survival that operate on all life everywhere, shaping lineages over time in ways that are subtle but cumulative, building diversity slowly and patiently across the ages. The deep sea is the largest habitat on Earth by volume, encompassing more space than all terrestrial and shallow marine environments combined. From depths of 1,000 meters to the floor of the deepest trenches at 11,000 meters, the ocean is vast beyond comprehension, a three-dimensional realm that extends horizontally across all ocean basins and vertically through thousands of meters of water column, a habitat so large that it could contain all the mountains and valleys and plains of the continents with room to spare. Most of this space is empty, or at least appears empty to human eyes. with animals spread thinly across vast distances, separated by kilometers of dark water, their densities so low that encounters between individuals may be rare events. Chance meetings that must be exploited when they occur, because the next opportunity might not come for weeks or months. This immensity shapes the ecology of the deep, favoring organisms that can tolerate solitude, that can survive long periods without feeding, that have sensory systems adapted to detect faint signals across great distances, and that reproduce in ways that do not require the partners to find each other directly, but instead release eggs and sperm into the water and trust that currents will bring them together. Despite the harsh conditions and the scarcity of food, biodiversity in the deep sea is surprisingly high, with species richness in some regions rivaling that of tropical rainforests or coral reefs. This diversity is maintained by a combination of factors including habitat heterogeneity, with different types of seafloor supporting different communities, and the patchy distribution of food, which prevents any one species from monopolizing resources. The deep sea is not uniform, but is instead a mosaic of microhabitats, each with its own set of environmental conditions, its own assemblage of organisms, its own patterns of predation and competition and symbiosis. Abyssal plains, seamounts, hydrothermal vents, cold seeps, submarine canyons, mid-ocean ridges, trenches. Each of these habitats hosts a unique community, and together they contribute to the overall diversity of the deep ocean, making it one of the most biodiverse environments on the planet despite its apparent monotony. The deep sea presents an infinite variety of environmental conditions, gradients of temperature and pressure and oxygen and salinity and current speed and sediment type, and each combination of these factors creates a microenvironment that can support a distinct community of organisms. Some species are generalists, able to tolerate a wide range of conditions and found across large areas of the seafloor, while others are specialists, restricted to narrow ranges of depth or substrate type or food availability, and found only in localized patches where their specific requirements are met. This variation in niche breadth contributes to the high overall diversity of the deep sea because it allows many species to coexist without directly competing, each exploiting a slightly different resource or occupying a slightly different position in the physical environment. Over evolutionary time, this partitioning of resources and habitat has led to the accumulation of species, with new lineages arising and persisting as long as they can find an unoccupied niche, and with extinctions occurring when environmental changes eliminate the conditions that a species requires. The abyssal zones of the ocean, those regions deeper than 4,000 meters, remain among the least explored parts of our planet, with vast areas that have never been surveyed and where the communities of organisms living there are completely unknown. These regions are difficult and expensive to access, requiring specialized equipment and expertise, and as a result, only a tiny fraction of the abyssal seafloor has been visited by humans or by remotely operated vehicles. What little we do know suggests that abyssal communities are diverse and complex, with species adapted to the extreme conditions of pressure and cold and darkness, and that they play important roles in biogeochemical cycles, processing organic matter that falls from above and recycling nutrients back into the water column. But much remains uncertain, and each new expedition to the abyss reveals organisms and behaviors that were previously unknown, expanding our understanding of what is possible and reminding us how little we actually know about the ocean that covers most of our planet. knowledge of the deep sea is being built slowly and painstakingly through the efforts of scientists around the world who are working to map and sample and observe these environments, to catalog the species that live there, to understand the processes that structure communities and drive ecosystem function. This work requires patience and persistence because the deep sea does not yield its secrets easily, and progress is measured in decades rather than years, with each expedition adding a few more pieces to a puzzle that is far from complete. Yet the effort is essential, not only for satisfying human curiosity about the natural world, but also for informing decisions about how to manage and protect marine resources, how to minimize the impacts of fishing and mining and pollution, how to preserve biodiversity in the face of rapid environmental change, and how to ensure that future generations will inherit an ocean that is as rich and diverse and full of life as the one we know today. The mission of preserving the deep ocean and its inhabitants has become increasingly urgent as human activities extend into regions that were once beyond our reach, and as the impacts of climate change and pollution spread even to the most remote parts of the sea. Scientists and conservationists around the world are working to identify areas that deserve protection, to establish marine reserves where extractive activities are prohibited, and to develop management strategies that balance human needs with the imperative to maintain biodiversity and ecosystem function. This work is challenging because it requires international cooperation, and because the deep sea is so poorly known that we are often trying to protect habitats and species we have barely begun to study, making decisions based on incomplete information and hoping that precaution will be sufficient to prevent irreversible damage. It reminds us that preservation is not just about setting aside pristine areas, but also about how we manage the places where humans and nature interact, how we harvest resources sustainably, how we minimize pollution and disturbance, and how we plan for a future where the ocean continues to provide the services that human civilization depends on. Marine ecosystems provide services that are essential to human well-being, but that are often invisible or taken for granted until they begin to fail. The ocean produces more than half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere through the photosynthesis of phytoplankton, microscopic algae that drift in the sunlit surface waters and that form the base of most marine food webs. The ocean also absorbs about a quarter of the carbon dioxide that humans emit into the atmosphere each year, acting as a buffer that slows the pace of climate change on land, but at the cost of making seawater more acidic, a process known as ocean acidification that is already affecting organisms with calcium, carbonate shells, and skeletons. The ocean regulates climate by transporting heat from the equator to the poles through currents that flow like rivers through the sea, warming some regions and cooling others, and creating the temperature patterns that shape weather and determine where different ecosystems can exist. And the ocean provides food for billions of people, with fisheries supplying protein and livelihoods to communities around the world, particularly in developing countries where alternatives may be limited. These services are interconnected, and disruptions to one can cascade through the system, affecting others in ways that are difficult to predict, but that could be profound. Tourism based on marine biodiversity generates billions of dollars each year and supports millions of jobs in coastal communities around the world. People travel to see coral reefs and whale migrations, to dive among schools of fish, or to walk beaches where sea turtles nest, and these experiences create economic value that provides an incentive for conservation. In some regions, tourism revenue exceeds the value of fisheries, making the ocean more valuable as a destination than as a source of food, and shifting the economic calculus in favor of protection rather than exploitation. But tourism itself can be a source of stress on marine ecosystems, with too many visitors damaging fragile habitats, disturbing wildlife, and contributing to pollution, and so management must balance access with preservation, allowing people to experience the ocean while minimizing the impacts of their presence. Among the large marine animals that capture human imagination and that serve as symbols of ocean conservation, the H-shaped buoy merino, or manatee, stands out as a species of particular concern. These gentle herbivores, which can weigh up to 600 kilograms and which spend their days grazing on seagrass in shallow coastal waters, have been hunted to near extinction in some regions and face ongoing threats from boat strikes, habitat loss, and entanglement in fishing gear. Manatees reproduce slowly, with females giving birth to a single calf every 2 to 5 years. And this low reproductive rate means that populations recover slowly from declines, making them vulnerable to even modest levels of human-caused mortality. Conservation efforts have focused on protecting critical habitat, establishing speed zones for boats in areas where manatees are common, and rescuing and rehabilitating injured animals. And these efforts have had some success in stabilizing or increasing populations in certain areas, though the species remains at risk overall. Marine biodiversity spans an extraordinary range of sizes and forms, from microorganisms too small to see without a microscope to the largest animals that have ever existed on Earth, the blue whales that can reach lengths of 30 meters and weights of 200 tons. This diversity exists at every level of biological organization, from the genetic variation within populations to the variety of species within communities to the differences between ecosystems across regions. And it is this diversity that provides resilience, the ability of systems to absorb disturbances and to continue functioning even when conditions change. Loss of biodiversity reduces resilience, making ecosystems more fragile and less able to provide the services that humans depend on. And so maintaining diversity is not just an aesthetic or ethical concern, but a practical necessity for a world that is increasingly shaped by human activities and that will need all the resilience it can muster to adapt to the changes that are coming. Estuaries, the places where rivers meet the sea and where fresh water mixes with salt water, serve as nursery habitats for many marine species, providing sheltered conditions and abundant food for juvenile fish and invertebrates that will later move into the open ocean as adults. These transitional zones are highly productive, with nutrients from the land combining with the energy of the tides to create ecosystems that support dense populations and high biodiversity. But estuaries are also among the most threatened marine habitats, vulnerable to pollution from agricultural runoff and urban development, to physical alteration from dredging and filling, and to changes in freshwater flow caused by dams and water diversions upstream. Protecting estuaries requires managing entire watersheds, coordinating actions across jurisdictions and sectors, and recognizing that what happens on land affects what happens in the sea, that the ocean does not begin at the shoreline, but extends up every river and stream that drains into it. Coastal zones, the narrow band where land and ocean meet, are regions of transition and mixing, where terrestrial and marine ecosystems overlap, and where human populations concentrate, drawn by the resources and opportunities that coasts provide. These zones are dynamic, shaped by waves and tides and storms, by the deposition of sediments from rivers and the erosion of cliffs and beaches, by the growth of vegetation and the construction of infrastructure. They are also among the most biologically productive parts of the ocean, supporting fisheries and aquaculture, providing habitat for migratory birds and breeding grounds for marine mammals, and offering recreational opportunities for millions of people. But the concentration of human activity in coastal zones creates pressures that can degrade these ecosystems, and managing coasts sustainably requires balancing development with conservation, ensuring that economic growth does not come at the expense of the natural systems that make coasts valuable in the first place. The ocean plays a central role in regulating Earth's climate through a variety of processes that operate on timescales ranging from days to millennia. Ocean currents transport heat around the planet, moderating temperatures and influencing weather patterns in ways that affect every continent. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, storing it in deep waters for centuries or longer, and thereby removing it from the climate system, though this absorption is causing acidification that threatens marine life. The ocean also influences the water cycle, with evaporation from the surface providing moisture for precipitation on land, and with changes in ocean temperature affecting the intensity and distribution of rainfall. These climate regulation services are fundamental to the habitability of Earth, and disruptions to them could have consequences that extend far beyond the ocean itself, affecting agriculture and water supplies and the distribution of ecosystems across the globe. Marine organisms produce much of the oxygen that we breathe, with phytoplankton in the surface ocean generating more than half of the atmospheric oxygen through photosynthesis, a contribution that rivals or exceeds that of all terrestrial plants combined. This oxygen production has been ongoing for billions of years, since the first photosynthetic bacteria evolved and began releasing oxygen as a waste product, gradually transforming Earth's atmosphere from one dominated by carbon dioxide and nitrogen to one rich in oxygen that could support complex life. Today, phytoplankton continue this process, blooming in response to nutrients and light, growing rapidly and then dying and sinking, with each generation contributing to the oxygen we breathe and to the cycling of carbon through the ocean and atmosphere. Changes in phytoplankton productivity, whether from warming waters or changing nutrient availability or increasing acidity, could affect oxygen levels globally, though the magnitude of such changes is uncertain and the subject of ongoing research. Food webs in the ocean are interconnected in ways that link organisms across vast distances and across depths, with energy and nutrients flowing from primary producers to herbivores to predators in chains that can extend through many trophic levels. These connections mean that changes in one part of the web can affect many others, sometimes in unexpected ways, and that the loss of a single species can have cascading effects that alter the structure and function of entire ecosystems. Some species play disproportionately important roles, acting as keystone species whose presence maintains the balance of the community, and the removal of these species can trigger shifts that are difficult to reverse. Understanding these connections is essential for managing marine resources sustainably, for predicting how ecosystems will respond to environmental changes, and for identifying which species and habitats most need protection to maintain the integrity of the ocean as a whole. Corals, those ancient architects of the sea, build their structures from calcium carbonate, depositing this mineral slowly over years and decades and centuries, layer upon microscopic layer, creating formations that can grow to enormous sizes and that provide the foundation for entire ecosystems that depend on the physical complexity the corals create. This process of calcification, The construction of hard structures from dissolved minerals in seawater is sensitive to the chemistry of the ocean, and as the water becomes more acidic from the absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the ability of corals to build their skeletons is compromised, slowed down, and in some cases reversed, with existing structures beginning to dissolve faster than new material can be added. The ocean's acidity has increased by about 25% since before the 1700s, a change greater than any other time in the last 2 million years. And this rapid shift is happening faster than many organisms can adapt, forcing them to cope with conditions that their ancestors never experienced and that their physiology is not equipped to handle. Some corals and other calcifying organisms are able to compensate by expending extra energy to thicken their skeletons or to repair damage, but this energy must come from somewhere, and it is diverted from growth and reproduction, leading to smaller individuals and fewer offspring, effects that compound over generations and that can lead to population declines even if outright mortality is not immediately evident. Sponges, which are among the oldest multicellular animals on Earth, with lineages extending back more than 600 million years, filter water through their bodies continuously, pumping enormous volumes each day and extracting bacteria and organic particles as the water passes through specialized cells that line internal chambers. This filtering is not only how sponges feed, but also how they breathe, with oxygen diffusing into their tissues from the water flowing through them and carbon dioxide diffusing out. Some deep-sea sponges grow to impressive sizes, with individuals that can be meters across and that may be centuries old, their growth so slow that they add only fractions of a millimeter each year, building their silica skeletons grain by grain in the cold, dark water where they have settled. These large sponges create habitat for other organisms, with small crustaceans and worms living among the channels and cavities of the sponge body, sheltered from predators and benefiting from the flow of water that the sponge generates, a flow that brings food and carries away waste, and that makes the sponge a center of biological activity on an otherwise barren seafloor. Crustaceans, a diverse group that includes crabs, lobsters, shrimp, krill, and barnacles, are found at every depth in the ocean, from the shallowest tide pools to the deepest trenches, and they play a wide variety of ecological roles as scavengers, predators, filter feeders, and prey for larger animals. Many crustaceans have hard exoskeletons made of chitin reinforced with calcium carbonate, structures that provide protection from predators and support for muscles, but that must be shed periodically as the animal grows, leaving the crustacean temporarily vulnerable until the new exoskeleton hardens. Ocean acidification affects crustaceans by making it more difficult for them to build and maintain these exoskeletons, with laboratory studies showing that larvae of some species develop more slowly and have thinner shells in more acidic water, and with field observations revealing dissolution of shells in crabs living in waters where pH has dropped due to upwelling of deep carbon dioxide-rich water. The damage is not limited to the shell, but can also affect sensory structures, the tiny hairs and receptors that crustaceans use to navigate and find food. And when these structures are compromised, the animals may move more slowly, have trouble locating prey, and be more vulnerable to predators, effects that could reduce survival rates and alter the dynamics of entire communities. Mollusks, another enormously diverse group that includes snails, clams, oysters, squid, and octopuses, exhibit a wide range of forms and lifestyles, with some species having heavy shells and others having no shell at all, and with habitats ranging from shallow waters to the deep sea. Those mollusks that do have shells construct them from calcium carbonate, and like corals and crustaceans, they are vulnerable to ocean acidification, with research showing that mollusks experience reductions in survival, calcification, and growth when exposed to more acidic conditions. Oysters and clams, which are economically important as food for humans, have been affected by acidification in certain regions, with hatcheries reporting difficulties in producing larvae and juveniles during periods when upwelling brings low pH water to the coast, and with wild populations showing declines that may be partly attributable to changing ocean chemistry. The impacts are most severe during early life stages when larvae are trying to build their first shell and are particularly sensitive to environmental conditions, and even small reductions in larval survival can have large effects on recruitment and on the size of adult populations in subsequent years. Some fish in the deep ocean undertake vertical migrations, moving up toward the surface at night to feed on zooplankton and other prey that are more abundant in the upper water column, and then descending back to depth during the day to avoid predators that hunt by sight and that are most active in daylight. These migrations can span hundreds of meters and involve thousands or even millions of individual fish moving in coordinated patterns that create dense layers visible on sonar, layers that rise and fall with a regularity that reflects the daily cycle of light and dark, even in places where the fish themselves live below the reach of sunlight. The energy cost of these migrations is substantial, as the fish must swim against gravity when ascending and must expend energy to maintain position when they reach the shallower depths where they feed. But the benefits in terms of access to food and reduction in predation risk are apparently sufficient to make the behavior worthwhile, and it has evolved independently in many lineages, a testament to the advantages of exploiting resources at multiple depths rather than remaining confined to a single zone. Arthropods, the phylum that includes crustaceans as well as insects and spiders, are characterized by segmented bodies and jointed appendages, features that have proven remarkably versatile and that have allowed arthropods to colonize nearly every environment on Earth, including the deep sea, where they are represented primarily by crustaceans and by pycnogonids, strange spider-like creatures with long legs and tiny bodies that creep slowly across the seafloor. These deep-sea arthropods often have elongated legs and reduced body size, adaptations that may help them move efficiently in the soft sediments that cover much of the abyssal plain, or that may reduce their metabolic demands in an environment where food is scarce. Some arthropods are colonizers of three-dimensional structures like corals and sponges, living among the branches and crevices and feeding on particles that settle on these surfaces or on smaller organisms that also inhabit the structure, creating micro-communities that can be remarkably diverse despite the small spatial scale involved. Organisms in the deep sea adapt slowly to their environment over evolutionary timescales that are measured in millions of years, with changes accumulating gradually through mutation and selection, and with populations diverging as they become isolated in different regions or different depth zones. The stability of the deep sea means that adaptations that work in one generation are likely to work in the next, and so there is less pressure for rapid evolution than in more variable environments where conditions change frequently and where organisms must constantly adjust to new challenges. This slow pace of evolution means that deep-sea species may be particularly vulnerable to rapid environmental changes like those being caused by human activities, because they lack the genetic variation and the plasticity needed to respond quickly. and because their long generation times mean that adaptation through natural selection will take many decades or centuries even if the necessary genetic variation is present. Sedimentation in the ocean is a continuous process, with particles of organic and inorganic material falling from the surface waters toward the bottom, drifting downward through the water column at rates that depend on their size and density and on the currents that carry them horizontally as they sink. This rain of particles is the primary mechanism by which energy and nutrients are transported from the productive surface layers to the deep sea, and it sustains the communities of organisms that live on and in the sediments that cover the seafloor. The rate of sedimentation varies with location and with season, being higher in regions below productive surface waters and during times of the year when plankton blooms are occurring, and this variability creates temporal patterns in food availability that deep-sea organisms must cope with, either by storing energy during periods of abundance or by reducing metabolic rates during periods of scarcity. Currents in the ocean transport not only water, but also dissolved nutrients and suspended organic matter, distributing these resources across vast distances and connecting ecosystems that might otherwise be isolated from one another. Deep-sea currents can be quite strong in certain locations, particularly near topographic features like seamounts and ridges where the flow is accelerated or deflected, and these currents create habitats that are distinct from the calmer waters of the abyssal plains, habitats that support different communities adapted to the enhanced flow and to the higher availability of food that the currents bring. Filter-feeding organisms are particularly common in these current-swept environments, where they can take advantage of the steady supply of particles being transported past them, and their presence in turn supports populations of predators and scavengers that feed on the filter feeders or on their waste products. Zooplankton, the small animals that drift in the water column and that feed on phytoplankton or on other zooplankton, are a critical link in marine food webs, transferring energy from primary producers to larger animals like fish and whales. Some zooplankton remain in the surface waters throughout their lives, while others undertake vertical migrations, rising to the surface at night to feed and descending to depth during the day, a behavior that helps them avoid visual predators and that also transports organic matter downward as the zooplankton respire and excrete and eventually die at depth. This vertical transport is an important component of the biological pump, the set of processes that move carbon from the surface ocean to the deep ocean, where it can be stored for centuries, and disruptions to zooplankton populations or to their migration behavior could affect the efficiency of this pump and alter the ocean's role in regulating atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. Particles in the ocean sediment continuously and slowly from the waters above, drifting downward through the water column in a process that takes days or weeks, depending on their size and density and on the currents that carry them horizontally as they descend toward the seafloor. This sedimentation is unceasing, a gentle rain of organic and inorganic material that has been falling for millions of years and that will continue for millions more, covering the bottom in layers of mud and ooze that record the history of life in the ocean, preserving shells and skeletons and other hard parts that resist decay and that accumulate slowly, building deposits that can be meters or tens of meters thick. The particles that reach the bottom become part of the substrate, mixed and bioturbated by the organisms that live there, processed by bacteria that break down organic molecules and recycle nutrients, and eventually buried by newer sediment falling from above, layers upon layers, each one representing a snapshot of the ocean at a particular moment in time. The substrate on the seafloor accumulates detritus over time, organic matter that was once part of living organisms, but that has now been broken down into unrecognizable fragments, mixed with mineral particles eroded from land and transported to the sea by rivers or blown in by wind. This accumulation creates a sediment layer that is rich in bacteria and that provides habitat for a variety of small animals that burrow through the mud or creep across its surface, feeding on the organic material and on the microorganisms that break it down. The thickness of this layer varies with location, being deepest in areas that have been accumulating sediment for long periods without disturbance, and thinnest on rocky outcrops or in areas where currents are strong enough to prevent sediment from settling. Over geological time, these sediments can be compressed and lithified into rock, preserving a record of past ocean conditions and of the organisms that lived there, a record that scientists study to understand how the ocean has changed over millions of years and how it might change in the future. Cadavers of large animals that die in the surface waters or that are killed by predators sink to the seafloor, where they become food for scavengers that specialize in feeding on dead tissue, a feeding strategy known as necrophagy. These scavengers include certain species of fish and crustaceans that are attracted to the chemical signals released by decomposing flesh and that can detect these signals from great distances, sometimes traveling kilometers to reach a carcass. When a large animal, like a whale or a dolphin, sinks to the bottom, it becomes the center of a feeding frenzy, with scavengers arriving within hours or days and consuming the soft tissues over a period of weeks or months, stripping the skeleton clean and leaving only bones. Even the bones are eventually consumed by specialized bacteria that break down the lipids stored in the bone matrix, a process that can take years or decades, and by the time the bones have completely disintegrated, nothing remains but a slight depression in the sediment where the carcass once lay, a temporary enrichment that supported a burst of biological activity in an otherwise food-poor environment. The ability to move freely through the water allows fish to practice predation, actively hunting other animals across distances that sedentary organisms cannot cover. This mobility gives fish access to prey that are distributed patchily across the seafloor or that hide in crevices or burrow into sediment, prey that would be unavailable to sessile predators like anemones or corals that must wait for food to come within reach. Fish that hunt in the deep sea often have highly developed sensory systems, including large eyes adapted to detect faint bioluminescent flashes, lateral line organs that sense vibrations in the water from the movements of other animals, and olfactory systems that can detect chemical cues from prey or from potential mates. These sensory adaptations allow fish to find food and to navigate in an environment where visibility is zero and where other cues are faint and intermittent, an environment that would be completely disorienting to animals that rely primarily on vision. Films of bacteria cover the surfaces of rocks and sediments on the seafloor, forming thin layers that are invisible to the naked eye, but that represent an important food source for organisms that graze on them. These bacterial films, also called biofilms, are composed of millions of individual bacterial cells embedded in a matrix of polysaccharides and proteins that the bacteria secrete, creating a structure that adheres firmly to the substrate and that protects the cells from being swept away by currents. The bacteria metabolize organic matter that settles onto the surface or that is dissolved in the water flowing past, and they convert this material into bacterial biomass that can be consumed by grazers, small invertebrates, that scrape the surface with specialized mouthparts and that digest the bacteria along with the biofilm matrix. This grazing activity is an important pathway by which energy and nutrients are transferred from the microbial community to higher trophic levels, linking the invisible world of bacteria to the visible world of animals. Microorganisms that are too small to be seen without a microscope form the base of many food chains in the deep sea, converting dissolved organic matter and chemical energy into living tissue that can be consumed by larger organisms. These microorganisms include bacteria and archaea, single-celled organisms that are extraordinarily diverse and that occupy nearly every available niche in the ocean, from the sunlit surface to the deepest trenches, from oxygenated waters to anoxic sediments, from hot hydrothermal vents to frigid polar seas. Some microorganisms are free-living, drifting in the water column or living on the surfaces of particles, while others form symbiotic relationships with larger animals, living inside their tissues and providing nutrients in exchange for shelter and access to chemical-rich environments. The metabolism of these microorganisms drives biogeochemical cycles, transforming nitrogen and sulfur and carbon between different chemical forms and thereby influencing the chemistry of the ocean and the availability of nutrients for other organisms. Material that is suspended in the water column floats there, held up by turbulence or by its own buoyancy, neither sinking to the bottom nor rising to the surface, but instead drifting at some intermediate depth where it can be captured by filter-feeding organisms that pump water through their bodies or that extend appendages into the current. This suspended material includes living organisms like bacteria and phytoplankton, dead cells and fecal pellets, aggregates of organic matter bound together by sticky mucus and mineral particles that are small enough to remain in suspension. The concentration of suspended material varies with depth and location, being highest in surface waters where productivity is greatest and in regions where upwelling or turbulence keeps particles from settling. Filter feeders that rely on suspended material for food must process large volumes of water to extract sufficient nutrition, and their feeding rates are limited by the concentration of particles and by the energy cost of pumping water through their filtering structures. Coral reefs, both in tropical shallows and in the cold waters of the deep, serve as hotspots of biodiversity, habitats where species richness is far higher than in surrounding areas. This concentration of diversity is a result of the physical structure that reefs provide, creating a complex, three-dimensional environment with countless microhabitats, crevices, and caves and overhangs where different species can find shelter and where they can partition resources to reduce competition. The high productivity of reefs, driven by symbiotic algae in the case of tropical corals, or by efficient filter feeding in cold water corals, supports large populations of herbivores and predators, which in turn attract larger mobile predators from surrounding areas, creating a cascade of interactions that link the reef to the broader ocean ecosystem. Damage to reefs, whether from warming waters or acidification or physical destruction, disrupts these interactions and can lead to the loss of biodiversity not only on the reef itself but in surrounding areas that depend on the reef as a source of recruits or as a feeding ground. Many marine species depend on specific habitats for critical parts of their life cycle, and the loss or degradation of these habitats can have disproportionate effects on population sizes. For some fish, this means dependence on coral reefs or seagrass beds where juveniles find shelter from predators while they grow large enough to move into open water. For others, it means dependence on estuaries or mangrove forests where conditions are suitable for spawning and where larvae can develop in relative safety. When these habitats are destroyed or altered, the species that depend on them may suffer declines even if the adult habitat remains intact because recruitment fails and populations cannot replace themselves. This dependence on habitat connectivity, the linkage between different environments that organisms use at different life stages, means that conservation must consider entire seascapes rather than focusing on individual sites in isolation. Populations of marine organisms fluctuate naturally over time in response to environmental variability and to changes in predation and competition. These fluctuations can be dramatic, with population sizes swinging by orders of magnitude from year to year, especially for short-lived species with high reproductive rates. Long-term monitoring is necessary to distinguish these natural fluctuations from trends caused by human activities to determine whether a population decline is part of a normal cycle or whether it represents a response to fishing or pollution or climate change that will not reverse on its own. Such monitoring requires sustained effort over decades, consistent methodology, and careful analysis to separate signal from noise, but it is essential for understanding how marine ecosystems are changing and for evaluating the effectiveness of management actions intended to protect or restore populations. Scientists continue their work of monitoring populations of marine organisms across the world's oceans, tracking changes in abundance and distribution over time, documenting shifts in community composition as some species become more common and others decline. This monitoring requires consistent effort over many years or even decades, with researchers returning to the same sites season after season, using standardized methods to collect data that can be compared across time and space. The work is often tedious and repetitive, consisting of surveys and censuses and sample collections that yield small increments of information. But these increments accumulate over time into data sets that reveal patterns and trends that would be invisible in shorter studies. Patterns that tell us how the ocean is changing and whether the changes are natural fluctuations or the result of human activities that will not reverse without intervention. Declines in marine biodiversity are being documented through long-term studies that track populations and communities over time, providing evidence of how human impacts are altering the ocean. These studies reveal patterns of loss that are consistent across regions and taxa, with populations declining and species disappearing at rates that far exceed natural background levels. The documentation is essential for raising awareness, for informing policy decisions, for evaluating the effectiveness of conservation measures, and for understanding the mechanisms by which human activities affect marine life. But documentation alone is not sufficient to reverse the trends. Action is also required. Changes in how we harvest resources, in how we manage coastal development, in how we regulate pollution, and in how we respond to climate change. Conservation of marine biodiversity requires coordinated action at international, national, and local scales, with governments and communities and industries all playing roles in protecting habitats and managing resources sustainably. This coordination is challenging because the ocean does not respect political boundaries, and because marine organisms often move across jurisdictions during their lives, spawning in one country's waters and feeding in another's, making it difficult to assign responsibility for conservation and to enforce regulations. International agreements and treaties provide frameworks for cooperation, but implementation depends on the willingness of individual nations to prioritize conservation over short-term economic interests, a calculation that often favors exploitation over preservation, particularly in developing countries where resources are scarce and where the ocean provides livelihoods for millions of people who have few alternatives. The ocean sustains billions upon billions of individual organisms, from bacteria too small to sea to whales larger than any dinosaur, all living together in a vast interconnected system that has existed for hundreds of millions of years. This immense population represents an accumulation of biomass that rivals the terrestrial biosphere, and it performs functions that are essential to the planet's habitability, producing oxygen, regulating climate, cycling nutrients, and providing food for a significant fraction of the human population. The sheer scale of life in the ocean is difficult to comprehend, with densities that can reach billions of microorganisms per liter of water in some locations, and with aggregations of larger animals like fish or krill that can extend for kilometers and contain millions or billions of individuals moving together in synchronized patterns. All forms of marine life are interconnected through networks of interactions that link species across trophic levels and across habitats, creating webs of dependency where the fate of one species is tied to the fates of many others. These connections are often invisible, operating through mechanisms like larval dispersal or nutrient cycling, or the movements of migratory species that transport energy and nutrients between distant locations. The interconnectedness means that impacts in one part of the ocean can propagate to other parts, sometimes in unexpected ways, and it means that conservation efforts must consider entire ecosystems rather than focusing on individual species in isolation. Understanding these connections is a central goal of marine ecology, and it requires research that spans scales from molecules to ecosystems, from hours to decades, integrating information from many disciplines and many sources. Marine ecosystems, particularly those in the deep sea, are fragile in ways that are not immediately obvious, with slow growth rates and low reproductive rates, making populations vulnerable to disturbances from which they may take decades or centuries to recover. The stability of the deep sea environment has meant that organisms there have not evolved the resilience needed to cope with rapid changes, and so they may be particularly susceptible to stresses like warming or acidification or pollution that occur on timescales shorter than their generation times. This fragility is compounded by the fact that deep-sea ecosystems are poorly known, with much of the biodiversity still undescribed and with many ecological relationships still undocumented, making it difficult to predict how these systems will respond to human impacts and difficult to design management strategies that will protect them effectively. Research into the deep sea continues to reveal mysteries that challenge our understanding of biology and of the limits of life on Earth. Each expedition brings back specimens and observations that expand the catalog of known species and that document behaviors and adaptations that were previously unknown. Scientists working in this field are driven by curiosity about the natural world and by the recognition that the deep sea represents a vast reservoir of biodiversity that may hold insights into evolution, into biochemistry, into the origins of life, and into the ways that organisms can adapt to extreme conditions. The research is expensive and technically demanding, requiring international collaborations and long-term commitments of resources, but it is essential for understanding the ocean and for ensuring that future generations will inherit a planet that is as rich and diverse and full of wonder as the one we know today. Discoveries in the deep ocean happen regularly as scientists deploy new technologies and explore regions that have never been visited before. These discoveries include new species, new habitats, new behaviors, and new ecological relationships that were not anticipated and that require revisions to our understanding of how marine ecosystems function. Some discoveries are dramatic, like the finding of hydrothermal vent communities that derive energy from chemical reactions rather than from sunlight, while others are more subtle, like the recognition that deep-sea fish undertake vertical migrations that link surface and deep waters in ways that affect carbon cycling. Each discovery adds to the body of knowledge about the ocean and reminds us how much remains to be learned, how vast the ocean is, and how small our understanding of it. Protection of deep-sea habitats is essential for preserving biodiversity and for maintaining ecosystem functions that we are only beginning to appreciate. These habitats, which include seamounts, hydrothermal vents, cold seeps, coral gardens, and abyssal plains, support communities that have evolved over millions of years and that cannot be replicated once destroyed. Damage from fishing, mining, pollution, and climate change is already occurring in some regions, and the pace of exploitation is accelerating as technology makes it possible to access resources that were previously out of reach. Establishing marine protected areas and implementing regulations that limit destructive activities are steps that can help preserve these habitats, but they require political will and international cooperation, and they must be based on sound science that identifies which areas are most important and most vulnerable. The ocean continues to guard its secrets even as we probe deeper and learn more about what lies beneath the waves. There are still vast regions that have never been explored, depths that have never been visited, species that have never been seen, and processes that we have only begun to understand. The ocean is ancient, far older than human civilization, and it will persist long after we are gone, its waters continuing to circulate, its creatures continuing to evolve, its rhythms following patterns set by the sun and the moon and the turning of the earth. And in that vastness and that patience, there is something deeply reassuring. A reminder that we are part of a larger system, that the ocean has held life for billions of years, and that it will continue to do so as long as we allow it, as long as we recognize its value not just as a resource to be exploited, but as a living system that deserves respect and protection, a place of mystery and beauty and endless, quiet depths where creatures glow in the darkness, and where life finds a way to persist even in conditions that seem impossible, a place that invites us to wonder and to dream and to rest in the knowledge that there is still so much to discover, so much that remains hidden beneath the surface, waiting patiently in the deep.